At Queen's Park, Macphail continued to fight for the causes that she had fought for in the House of Commons. For instance, Macphail had long been frustrated that men and women could be paid different wages, even if they were doing exactly the same job. So in 1951, she pushed for the passage of Ontario's first equal pay legislation that set up a framework to ensure that men and women received equal pay for equal work. Hi, and welcome to episode 8 of season 1 of Social Democrats of the North, presented by the Broadbent Institute's Perspectives Journal podcast series. I'm your host, Dave McGrane, a professor of political science at St. Thomas More College at the University of Saskatchewan and member of the Perspectives Journal Editorial Committee. From Confederation to the Quiet Revolution, Social Democrats of the North takes you on a journey through history to discover the lives and ideas of the leaders who have shaped Canadian social democracy. I explore what social democracy has contributed to Canadian history and give you some tips for your own political activism. In the last episode, I looked at William Irvine, who was a Social Democratic MP from Alberta and a key figure in the creation of the CCF. In this episode, I'm going to discuss the life and the ideas of someone who's considered to be a feminist icon of Canadian history. What is less well known is that she was not just a feminist, but also a committed social democrat. I'm talking about Canada's first female MP, Agnes Macphail. Agnes Macphail was born in a log cabin on a small, modest farm in Grey County, Ontario in 1890. Her family struggled to get by. Macphail helped out as much as she could. She always preferred doing chores around the farm with her father as opposed to helping her mother cook and clean the house. She liked to be outside with the wind in her face and breathing the fresh air. However, she became frustrated when she was told to go inside and help her mother because working in the fields was considered to be men's work. But even more than being outside, what Macphail really loved was school. She excelled at elementary school and really enjoyed reading. She desperately wanted to go to high school and maybe even go on to university. However, her parents were strongly opposed to her continuing education for two reasons. First, they could not afford the tuition costs, and they did not have the money to pay for her room and board in Owen Sound, which was the city where the closest high school was located. Second, they said it was unnecessary for a woman to get an education. It was their opinion that their oldest daughter should learn how to cook, clean, and take care of children, so that she would be a good farm wife one day. The young Macphail became resentful. She wanted to become educated, choose her own profession, and go out and see the world, just like men were allowed to do. So she brooded over her cruel fate that she felt she suffered by being born a girl. Still, she did not let her bitterness get the best of her. After 2 years of her constantly asking her parents to reverse their decision, Macphail was finally allowed to go to Owen Sound to high school. She completed her high school studies in 2 years as opposed to the 4 years that it normally took. Now, her parents could no longer question her determination to pursue a career of her own instead of becoming a farm wife. She quickly finished her studies to get a teacher's certificate and then got a job teaching at a one-room school near Port Elgin in 1910. Over the next decade, she taught at several one-room schools in southwestern Ontario and even spent a year teaching in Alberta. During this time, she had many male suitors. Her family expected her to marry soon. Then she would stop teaching and become a farm wife and settle down and have children. However, Macphail decided to avoid marriage altogether. She loved children and wanted her own, but she was unwilling to accept the subordination to her husband that marriage would undoubtedly entail. Her unhappiness with life increased, and she once again felt frustrated. She believed that she was destined to make a bigger contribution to society than being just a farm wife or a teacher in a one-room rural school. But the opportunities available to women were limited, and women did not have the freedom and the independence that men enjoyed. She felt like a bird in a cage. She was ready to fly free, but could not escape. Then a series of events intervened that changed the course of her life. A farmers' movement called the United Farmers of Ontario was formed in 1914. While it was not really a social democratic movement, it did contain many radical farmers who could be considered to be social democratic in their leanings. Macphail wrote a letter to be published in the Farmer's Sun, which was the newspaper of the United Farmers of Ontario. She did not expect to receive a reply. So she was surprised when the editor of the Sun contacted her and invited her to participate in the activities of the United Farmers of Ontario. In fact, as a school teacher, Macphail would be eligible to become a member and go to meetings and speak out on political issues. This was the opportunity that she had been waiting for. She had long been concerned about the poverty of the families who sent their children to the schools where she taught, and she wanted to do something about it. And now she had finally found a cause that could command her total commitment and could allow her to contribute fully to her society. Full of optimism that she could change the world, she instantly joined the United Farmers of Ontario. She started to attend meetings and organized many new United Farmers of Ontario clubs. Word of her organizational abilities spread. She was eventually asked to start giving speeches at meetings, and she became a member of the board of directors of the women's wing of the United Farmers of Ontario. She also began to write columns in the Farmer's Sun that became well known for their audacity and wit and humor. Through her activities with the United Farmers of Ontario, Macphail was beginning to make the kind of contribution to her society that she had long desired to make. Then something unexpected happened that was a game changer in Macphail's world. Women were given the right to vote and given the right to stand as candidates in federal elections near the end of World War I. At the same time, the United Farmers of Ontario decided to start running farmer candidates in municipal, provincial, and federal elections. Macphail had never considered a political career, but this was like a door swinging wide open for her to walk through. A small number of women activists submitted Macphail's name to be the United Farmer of Ontario candidate in a by-election in North York in 1920. Macphail understood that this gesture was meant as a compliment and did not accept the nomination, letting it go to a man instead. Nonetheless, the seed had been planted. There was a federal election coming up in 1921, and the riding that contained Macphail's hometown had elected a United Farmer of Ontario candidate in the 1919 Ontario provincial election. She contacted her parents and told them that her plan was to resign her job as a teacher. She would then come back home and quietly start to campaign for the federal nomination in their riding for the United Farmers of Ontario. During this time, she would live off her savings and not be a financial drain on anyone. Her parents were completely opposed and said they would not even vote for her. They thought that a proper place for a woman was in the home, and they feared the rough treatment that awaited Macphail on the campaign trail. Macphail was obviously disappointed and frustrated by her parents' response. But she disregarded their opposition and went back home anyway to live with her ailing grandmother. Once she got back, she did not declare her intention to be a candidate right away. Then one day she was attending a community picnic, and the local Conservative member of Parliament gave a speech criticizing the United Farmers of Ontario. Some United Farmers of Ontario activists urged Macphail to stand up and give a rebuttal. She saw her chance and she grabbed it with both hands before it could slip away. Without any preparation, Macphail stood up and gave a convincing speech, refuting each point made by the much more experienced male politician. All of a sudden, she was considered a real contender for the federal nomination of the Progressive Party, which acted as the federal wing of the United Farmers of Ontario in her riding. At the nominating convention, there was 150 voting delegates, only one of which was a woman. After chiding the convention for not having more female delegates, Macphail gave a fiery speech. She was then elected as the nominee after 7 grueling rounds of voting. She was elated at her victory and hopeful about her chances to become the first woman elected to the Canadian House of Commons. In a stunning turn of events, the executive of her party asked her to step aside because they argued a woman could never win in their riding. Macphail was furious at such blatant sexism, but she stood her ground and did not yield an inch. She calmly insisted that she had won the nomination fair and square and that she would be their candidate in the next election. The ensuing campaign saw her have the support of 37 United Farmers of Ontario clubs in her riding, as well as the one union head office that was located in her riding. In total, she gave 55 speeches throughout the campaign in all parts of the riding that concentrated mostly on labor issues and farm issues. Her hard work paid off. At the young age of 31, she was duly elected for Grey County as Canada's first female MP. This was not just a personal accomplishment for Macphail. It was a sign of hope that the tide was starting to turn and the sexism facing women in Canada might start to be slowly subsiding. Indeed, the novelty of her election made headlines around Canada and made her an instant celebrity. But when she got to Ottawa to take her seat in the House of Commons, she faced sexism as reporters sought details of her personal life and asked her why she persisted in not getting married. Macphail herself later commented the following: "How could I have known that my clothes, my eating habits, the way I talked, would be remarked on in every detail by the reporters who attended the sessions? I had thought they would take notice of my ideas." She felt like an exotic curiosity, or a bear in a cage at a zoo, as she described it. She faced all sorts of insults and innuendos, many of which contradicted each other. Some people called her unattractive. Others accused her of using her beauty and womanly charms to steal MPs from their wives because she remained unmarried. It was not easy. She became disillusioned, bitter, and even angry at times. Still, pursuing a political career was her primary goal in life. In any case, quitting was not an option. She thought that her quitting would only be used to show that women were not up to the job of being an MP. So she endured and went on to serve in the House of Commons for the next 19 years. The first 14 of those years, she was the only female MP, facing 234 male MPs every time that she rose to speak. The 1920s were a tumultuous time in the Canadian House of Commons, with Social Democratic MPs changing their party labels often. This was certainly the case for Macphail. She entered into the House of Commons as a progressive MP in 1921. In 1924, she moved into J.S. Wordsworth's Ginger Group, which was a combination of radical farmer MPs and Labour MPs dedicated to pushing the Liberal federal government to the left. Macphail was then a crucial part of the foundation of the CCF in 1932, and she was a CCF MP in the House of Commons from 1933 to 1940. Overall, her career in the House of Commons from 1921 to 1940 illustrated dedication to social democracy, prison reform, peace, and feminism. Her social democracy starts from the idea that Canada's greatest moral failing is that its economy is unjust. For her, it's completely unjust that Canada's economy withholds material comfort from those who toil the most, farmers and workers, while bestowing huge riches on the owners of businesses who do very little in terms of productive labor. She regrets the lack of empathy that she sees in Canadian society as well. She laments the fact that Canadians are unable to put themselves in the shoes of other people and therefore let injustices continue all around them. When describing the poor lining up at soup kitchens and sleeping on the floors of homeless shelters during the Great Depression, she said the following: "I don't know what they were suffering, but I know I suffered. The difficulty is that we do not think about them as if they were ourselves." But Macphail was hopeful that a solution was at hand. She said that progressive taxation was needed, where the rich would pay a larger percentage of their income in taxes compared to the poor. The money from progressive taxation could then be used to pay for social programs such as public education, healthcare, pensions, and unemployment insurance. Macphail argued that a combination of progressive taxation and social programs would eventually eliminate poverty in Canada. Following a riot at the federal prison in Kingston, Macphail went on a fact-finding mission to the prison. When she attempted to visit the prison to investigate how its inmates were treated, she was told that no ladies were allowed inside. Macphail became angry and famously pushed past the guard, saying, "I'm no lady, I'm an MP." She was outraged to discover the beatings and the shacklings that prisoners were subject to. She became nationally known by repeatedly speaking out against the inhumane conditions in Canadian prisons. Again, she did not just get angry. She expressed hope that there could be a solution. She called for rehabilitation programs in prisons and rules around how prisoners could be treated, things that were unheard of during her time. Her persistence on raising the issue of prisoners' rights eventually paid off when the federal government appointed the Archambault Commission in 1936. There was then a complete reorganization of Canada's federal prisons that greatly improved the treatment of inmates. Like many of her colleagues in the Ginger Group and the CCF, Macphail was a pacifist. She was infuriated that World War I had killed so many young men and women, but concrete measures to ensure world peace did not seem to be on the minds of many Canadians. But she was hopeful that the prospects for international cooperation for peace were good. She joined the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. She subsequently argued in favor of disarmament and pushed against the glorification of war and empire. She consistently took the position that diplomatic negotiation could replace armed conflict. And she argued for this position as Canada's first female delegate to the League of Nations, which was a forerunner of the United Nations. Finally, Macphail often spoke about feminism during her long parliamentary career. She expressed her frustration with the way that women were treated in Canadian society. She argued that Canadian society routinely discriminates against its female citizens by denying them the basic opportunities that are routinely provided to men. Unlike men, women are chained to their homes and not allowed to work as soon as they get married. Marriage for women, according to Macphail, means that women have no economic independence. So, married women cannot pursue the career of their choosing and cannot structure their lives how they see fit. Macphail made the decision to never marry herself, despite several offers. At the same time that she critiqued the institution of marriage, she expressed hope that laws could be passed to make marriage more fair for women. Macphail called for divorce laws that are the same for men and women. And she said that women should be recognized as legal persons under the law to improve their ability to possess, control, and inherit property after they are married. Macphail pointed out that Canadians must recognize that discrimination against women ends up being a substantial barrier to the progress of Canadian society and the progress of the Canadian economy. Only when women are no longer enslaved in marriage, Macphail said, could they fully contribute to society by choosing whatever career that they wanted. So for Macphail, changing the laws around marriage was not only good for women, it was also good for all of Canadian society because women could then contribute all they could to the economy. Macphail was eventually defeated as an MP in 1940. However, at the age of 50, she showed no signs of slowing down. There was too much poverty, war, sexism, and injustice in the world, and she was hopeful that she could still do something about it. After being a journalist for a couple of years, she decided to run in the Ontario provincial election in 1943. She won in the riding of York East for the CCF. Along with another female CCF candidate, Macphail became one of the first two women to become members of the Ontario legislature. At Queen's Park, Macphail continued to fight for the causes that she had fought for in the House of Commons. For instance, Macphail had long been frustrated that men and women could be paid different wages, even if they were doing exactly the same job. So in 1951, she pushed for the passage of Ontario's first equal pay legislation that set up a framework to ensure that men and women received equal pay for equal work. However, shortly after the success, Macphail lost her seat in the Ontario provincial election of 1951. She went back to journalism and organizing for the CCF for a brief time, but then her health began to fail her. She died of a heart attack in 1954 at the age of 63. Looking back, Agnes Macphail made many notable contributions to Canadian history. She is still remembered today as being the first woman to be elected to the Canadian House of Commons. In fact, she was even put on the Canadian $10 bill in 2017. However, it is important to note that Macphail was a committed social democrat in addition to being Canada's first female MP. The social democratic part of her legacy is sometimes forgotten. As part of the Ginger Group and the CCF, she successfully pushed for additions to Canada's welfare state like old age pensions, unemployment insurance, and labor rights. Her activism around prison reform led to more humane conditions in prisons. And she was also a voice for peace. She helped Canadian society get away from glorifying war and pushed us towards becoming a nation of peacekeepers. The lesson from Agnes Macphail's life for us today is that it's natural to be angry at the injustice that we see around us. In fact, anger and injustice is a necessary part of social democracy and a necessary part of politics. But unlike right-wingers, we can't just be angry for the sake of being angry. Right-wingers just get mad and scream about everything that's a matter with society without proposing to do anything about it. Agnes Macphail was furious about the sexism and injustice that she encountered many times throughout her life. However, her anger never prevented her from presenting a hopeful vision of a new society where justice did not exist. She was very effective at being angry and hopeful at the same time. Now, I would say that this balance between anger and hope is tricky. This is especially the case for female politicians. When condemning something, a female politician is perceived often as being angry, whereas a male politician is perceived as being forceful when condemning the same thing. Despite this sexist double standard, both female and male social democrats shouldn't back away from mixing anger with hope in their politics. Anger and hope are both natural human emotions. And if, like Macphail, we can somehow find a way to make our anger lead towards hope, we just might be onto something. I'm Dave McGrane, and thank you for joining me on Social Democrats of the North, a Perspectives Journal podcast series produced by the Broadbent Institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe or leave a review on the Perspectives Journal podcast on all major podcast platforms, and share it with someone you know who loves Canadian political history. And subscribe to Press Progress's award-winning Sources podcast that digs deeper into the news stories you won't find in any major newspaper. The Perspectives Journal podcast and Sources are proud members of the Harbinger Media Network, Canada's progressive podcast community. You can read more about social democracy in Perspectives Journal, a publication of the Broadbent Institute, by visiting perspectivesjournal.ca. And for more information on the work of the Broadbent Institute, subscribe to our mailing list at broadbentinstitute.ca/subscribe. Next time, we'll look at a group of professors that got out of the ivory tower and jumped into politics. Until then, keep questioning the status quo and stay social democratic.